In our second video for the French Revolution, we're picking up the pieces that we saw left for us at the end of the first video. The National Assembly has written its Declaration of the Rights of Man. They've arrested the king. They are holding him prisoner. They're working with the king a little bit to try to figure out what government should France now have once it's gotten rid of an absolute monarch. Now, this is a tougher question than it seems because France has been ruled by an absolute monarch since the Roman Empire, right? France, I guess we keep that in the back of our mind. So, in this very fraught political, economic, and social time period in France, a lot of different competing voices and groups are going to be making persuasive arguments that their idea for government is correct. So, some people are going to want a little bit of change, some people are going to want a lot of change, and we'll see how that plays out over the course of the next couple of years here in French history. The new governing body of France is the National Assembly. When the delegates of the National Assembly begin to sit down and start to hammer out what type of government they have, they begin to sit together with like minded political individuals. So, just like how we see the freshmen right, in the lunchroom at Joliet Catholic sit by their own kind of friends and the people who like the same things like that. That's kind of what we see here. So when you're putting down this chart that in our notes, we want to make sure that we keep these the same because what we'll see here is the designations of where people sit and the spectrum on their political willingness for change is very much become what we see politics described in terms of today. On the far left of the National Assembly sat the radicals. And again, before we get too far, I want to preface that you should know you should know in these columns how much change these four groups want. Do they want a lot of change? Do they want a little bit of change? The nickname for the different groups that are in there, and those will pop up, as well as what type of government are they advocating for, and maybe some important people in there. So our first column are the radicals. They want a republic. Remember, the United States has already gone through its revolution. The United States has already drafted its constitution. The United States has already had its first election re-electing George Washington by the time a lot of this is already happening. So this is not happening in a political vacuum. France is very much picking and choosing what it sees as being good and getting rid of bad things around there. So the radicals want a republic. The radicals of the French Revolution are called Jacobins. The Jacobins are pushing for a lot of change. How much change do these radical Jacobins want? To be honest, the best way to put it is that they want a complete and total change. They want to burn the system to the ground and out of the ashes of the former French government create something new. That's how much change they want. They don't want the same system. They want to burn it to the ground and have something rise up new out of this. So that's how far reaching and how drastic the change the Jacobins want. The Jacobins are going to be led by three different guys. Maximilien Robespierre is going to be the leader of the Jacobins. He's going to become the leaders of the radicals. He's going to become the most forthright, vehement advocator for a republic in France. Robespierre, you want to think of him as the brains of the organization. He is very good at finding consensus. He is very persuasive. He's very good at getting the right people in the right rooms to make the decision that he wants made at the right times. So he very much is the brains of the Jacobins. He is the person behind the scenes, pulling the strings and navigating how he wants the revolution to go and play out. So Robespierre is the leading Jacobin. He's the leading radical in the French Revolution. George Danton, who runs the Mountain Political Club, is another leading Jacobin. Danton is the voice of the Jacobins. He is an excellent public speaker. He's able to take Robespierre's ideas, put them in powerful, persuasive, and passionate speeches to be able to deliver to anybody. And again, he speaks with a passion that is hard to describe. One of the great public speakers in all of world history is what Danton is described as being able to create an argument and then find persuasive methods and examples to illustrate that argument to win you over to his side. Jean-Paul Marat is a social reformer and investigative reporter who very much wants to keep the revolution pushing forward, whereas Robespierre is the brains of the revolution and Danton is the voice of the revolution. Marat is the newspaper man. Marat is the one listening to Danton's speeches. Remember, only X amount of people can listen to Danton's speeches in person. Marat is there writing those down and then going and putting them, putting them into the printed page, and then having those newspapers and articles and speeches printed throughout all of France. So that's what Marat is able to do. And again, he's also pushing this radical Republican agenda forward. It's the radicals who are going to keep pushing the rest of the National Assembly towards their ideas. They're going to be the most forceful. They're going to be the most willing agents of change because that's how much change they want. It's the radicals who are going to get Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette beheaded as part of their quest for change, which again, we put this in the context of the beheading of Charles I of England. That's a big deal to kill a king. Remember, this is the most Catholic king of Europe, the king of France. So to chop off his head is a monumental step away from this belief in the divine right of kings and the king as a vessel of God's power. It's Maximilien Robespierre and the radical Jacobins who will institute the Committee of Public Safety to try to keep the public safe from the enemies of the revolution, with Robespierre as the head of this committee. And it's this committee that will then institute the reign of terror. This is not the reign of puppy dogs and ice cream. It's the reign of terror, as the Committee of Public Safety will use the new French government that they helped create to hunt down enemies of the revolution, rounding people up in the thousands, and then chopping their heads off or murdering them in the name of the revolution. So that's how much change the radicals want. And again, they sit on the left of the National Assembly. Left of the center in the National Assembly are the liberals. The liberals want the government of a constitutional monarchy. They look across the English Channel to the system that England has created after the Glorious Revolution, which is about 100 years after that. It says that England is working just fine. We can still keep our king to satisfy some of the more voices that want little change, and as well as they're looking to be able to put, again, keeping a similar system of what France has already had, but also implementing some of the needed changes that France needs to bring it up to date, if you will, for the time period. Whereas the radicals were called Jacobins, the liberals were the names called the sans culottes. Culottes are pants that kind of go just beyond the knee. So in order to, you don't want to show off your legs because you don't want to do that. So you would have fancy silk stockings that would go up to those things, and silk's going to be very expensive. So people who wore culottes would be people who are very much upper class, who are rich, who could afford it, who aren't willing to, who are not going to get into the dirt. Sans culottes would be without culottes. So they're not wearing those type of pants. They're wearing regular long pants. Think of what jeans are. So these are your regular, ordinary, quote unquote, people who want to keep the institution of the king, but recognize that the king needs checks, needs balances on his power, and don't want to push it as far as the radicals want. It's the liberals who are going to push and get the Declaration of the Rights of Man written. And it's going to be the liberals who are going to get the Constitution of 1791 written, which is then going to be used, and Robespierre is then going to attack and say, no, we want it farther to try to go and get rid of. To the right of the center in the National Assembly are the moderates. The moderates want a limited monarchy. So best way to explain this would be similar to a monarchy that England had after the Magna Carta. Now, we talked about the Parliament very much being a limited role of change after Magna Carta up until James the First, Charles the First, where the rubber stamping a lot of the king's ideas, but more taking the ideas of what Magna Carta will become, where the king has a lot of power. We're keeping very much the institution of the monarchy and what we have, but there are certain checks against the king's power to limit all the things that he can do. So it's not a total free reigning monarchy, but it's very much a monarchy where the king is limited by the law. It has to guarantee things to the French people by law and also has checks against his power. Moderates were called the Girondists, and one of the more famous Girondists was called Charlotte Corday. Charlotte Corday, who was getting upset with how the radicals were running the government, was getting upset with all the people being rounded up in her northern French town in Normandy. So she got in her mind to be able to attack what she felt was the person whipping everybody up into this frenzy in Jean-Paul Marat. So she went and hunted down Jean-Paul Marat. Now Marat, he's working towards the later stage of his life, gets a very debilitating skin disease, which makes his skin extraordinarily dry and chafe and flake and not be comfortable. And the only relief he had was to spend time in a bathtub. So Charlotte Corday sets up a meeting and goes to meet Marat, finds him in the bathtub, begins to interview him, begins to ask questions, when she pulls a knife that she bought that morning out of her corset, stabs him underneath the collarbone, and Marat is going to die within minutes. Charlotte Corday very much believes that she is in the right, that Marat is a bad person, whereas all other people in France are going to hail Marat as a martyr. 58 towns in France are going to change their name after Jean-Paul Marat after this. Jacques-Louis David, a very famous painter, within the French Revolution and a prominent radical in the system, paints Marat as a martyr. We'll go and see that, and so we'll see how again things are starting to move and change and mutate and evolve through the French Revolution here. Finally, on the far right of the National Assembly are conservatives, and conservatives want no change. They want an absolute monarchy, and they want to be able to keep the system that they have. In fact, they probably want to give more power to the king so that none of this can ever happen again. This is made up of French emigres as well as monarchs in Europe who are fearing revolt. So if you're a nobleman, it's the Great Fear, you're not going to stay in France, you're going to go get the heck out of there, stay with your aunt, your uncle, your cousin in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Sweden, in all these other kingdoms. And so they're going to be in those kingdoms and they're going to be persuading other kings and saying, hey, if this is what's happening in France, you don't want this virus of revolution moving throughout all of Europe. So it's going to be the conservatives, not just in the National Assembly, but throughout Europe, who begin to push back against the French Revolution, who want to stamp this out and snuff it out to make sure that this doesn't travel to their country. So two different portraits showing Maximilien Robespierre. So again, he's going to be the leader of the Jacobins. He is the prominent person pushing for a republic. He'll become the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, and it's under his watch that the Reign of Terror is instituted in France to protect the ideas of the French Revolution. His ideas are given voice by Georges Danton. And Georges Danton, the mountain, the voice of the French Revolution, will make these impassioned pleas and persuasive arguments to put Robespierre's ideas into action and to push the revolution towards Robespierre's goals. Jean-Paul Marat is going to be the one who's going to be writing what Danton and Robespierre are saying, putting it into his own words, and distributing it through the radical newspaper network Without France. So those are our Jacobins. Our sans-culottes are these guys right here on the far left. So our sans-culottes are without culottes. They are wearing pants. They've got the tricolor, the red, white, and blue of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. And they're the ones who are going and driving this whole different idea for change. But again, within the sans-culottes, how much change do we want? A lot of them only want a constitutional monarchy, but some of them want to push forward into this idea of a republic. To protect the ideas of the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror is put in place to arrest, try, and execute, sometimes within hours, of what are, quote, enemies of the revolution. But because this is an enlightened age and you don't want to execute people in unreasonable and unenlightened ways, the French want to do this quickly and in ways that are less cruel. So Dr. Guillotine is going to develop the guillotine, a pretty simple instrument, big hunk of steel and iron hauled up 10, 15 feet in the air, sharpened to a razor's edge, and then you just release the rope and the catch. It slides right down and it's going to cut somebody's neck off for it, in theory, should be an instantaneous death. Now, do we know if it still hurts as these people's brains or neurons are still firing as they fall into the basket, of which the last thing you probably see before the knife blade hits the back of your head is other heads within that basket? We don't know because no one's been able to talk after that. But this is the instrument of terror that's going to make the Reign of Terror such a synonymous idea of mob action and what happens when things start to move a lot farther. And the Reign of Terror very much becomes something where people are turning in neighbors, what you have to watch what you're saying in the street, because anything that might be construed of supporting the monarchy, of going back to what was before, could literally see you lose your head because of how much Robespierre wants France to be moving in that direction of change and away from the monarchy. So it's going to culminate again. What we see here, that's Marie Antoinette's head on a stick as she's being goaded and killed, and it becomes just more and more people to be able to do this. And again, when we talk about this idea of progress through the Enlightenment, you were able to kill a lot more people quickly and efficiently because of the invention of machines like the guillotine. So you can die more humanely, but you're also kind of like with this. This is a vast improvement on, say, the medieval system of public execution, where you've got an executioner with an axe who maybe doesn't want to actually kill people for a living. It's not a whole lot of fun, so maybe he's taken back and imbibing a whole lot of liquid courage the night before, so he's kind of wobbling and wavering as that axe goes up, and maybe he goes, huh, and hits you in your back instead of your neck, or maybe it's two tries to get through your neck bone, and so maybe not the most the guillotine might be an improvement, but if you're able to do that so quickly and kind of without the human element of looking down there at the person you're going to kill, then it allows for more people to do that. Again, it's not just the guillotine that's rounding up, quote, enemies of the revolution, but we're also seeing people lined up and being shot as well to keep this going and moving. So we can see kind of different ideas as well as a revolution, a propaganda being portrayed at this time period. And we see this on the left with Jean-Paul Marat sitting stabbed to death in his bathtub. This is by David, who again is very sympathetic to the revolution and a player within the Jacobin wing of the National Assembly. And here on the left, he's very much turning Marat into this martyr, this person who's died for the cause of revolution, whereas some people might not believe that. We can go and look at this painting, right? Kind of the literally on the right side, a reverse action where who's bathed in light, who's standing right tall, who thinks that they're in the right is Charlotte Corday and the Girondists, and Marat disheveled. Everything's knocked over by him in the darkness of the painting. We kind of go and we see the different actions in there. But again, Charlotte Corday will have her head be chopped off for that actions. We're skipping some things and we're highlighting things, but people begin to turn against the radicals and the Jacobins as this reign of terror begins to have no end and no way of resolving itself. There's always more enemies, there's always more problems. And again, the French are facing foreign invasions. There's rebellions throughout the country. There's internal strife happening. And so eventually the National Assembly will turn on Robespierre, and the chaos in the National Assembly will have Robespierre see himself. That's what this cartoon is portraying, where Robespierre himself is dropping the guillotine on his own body. Robespierre will be executed by the Reign of Terror, and France begins to look for someone, anyone, to kind of reel in the chaos that's going and transpiring. Keep in mind, the French Revolutionary armies are fighting off foreign invaders, are beginning to go and try to see that, hey, there's enemies of the revolution that are coming in and trying to attack it, to snuff it out. It becomes a major problem and a major issue. To summarize, summarize, what we've seen here is an evolution of political culture over this, where France has started out as the French kingdom, ruled by an absolute monarchy where privilege is the rule of the day. You have certain privileges afforded to you by your social and estate status, and the king is about the country of France. But as we saw, rising antiquated tax system, the poor harvest, rising food insecurity, rising debt. The king is forced to call the Estates General. The Estates General takes the tennis court oath. They become the National Assembly, and they move the government away. The liberals are able to get a constitutional monarchy written. This is where, again, the Jacobins then push for the king to be executed, and the king then is killed. This constitutional monarchy is then replaced by a national convention run by the Jacobins. They seize hold of the French government, get rid of the constitutional monarchy. Hard to have a constitutional monarchy if the monarch is dead, and they push for a republic. Within the new French Republic, we see the institution of the Committee of Public Safety, again led by the Jacobins, led by Robespierre. Under the Committee of Public Safety, we see the Reign of Terror instituted, but you also have to remember that we're seeing foreign wars, wars in France, rebellions, economic collapse that's going to eventually doom all the leaders of the Committee of Public Safety. Danton will be executed by the Reign of Terror by Robespierre. Marat will be stabbed by Charlotte Corday. Corday will get her head off. Robespierre will get his head cut off when the National Assembly in the French Republic turns against him. A new government called the Directory with less people in charge is put into place. And then we're going to move towards, as we get into our third video of the unit, where we get eventually the Empire of the French, where we have the French consulates be elected. One of those French consulate is Napoleon. He wins in a landslide election to elect him to become the new first consul of France. And why Napoleon is elected is that Napoleon will become about the French people. So he cares ostensibly on paper what he says about the French people. And what we've seen, if we're paying any sort of attention, is we've started in 1789 with an absolute monarch. And as we start to again talk about Napoleon and his domestic policies in France in the next unit, we begin to see Napoleon seizing all the power in France. And even though he's about the French, creating a national empire centered around him. Very quickly before I leave, I just want to, the French are going to very much push in the French Revolution, particularly Republican governments, against the clergy. They're going to disband Catholic churches and the clergy in France. They're going to turn the Cathedral of Notre Dame at the heart of Paris into a temple of reason and destroy a lot of the beautiful artwork that's been there for centuries. They're going to get rid of the Julian calendar that we have and have the French Revolutionary calendar that you can kind of see there, where we have 12 months of 10 days each. It's pretty much very similar to the Egyptian calendar, but you've got 10 days for every week, which means you only get a half day off on day 5 and a full day off on day 10. So you don't get 2 days off on Saturday, Sunday, or 1 day off if you're a French peasant. So the French peasants don't like this, but again, just adding another wrinkle to where the French, how much change they're looking for in the society, they go and they change the calendar. They change the hours and seconds and minutes in the day in pursuit of change to try to come up with a new way of looking and governing at country. So that's where we'll stop with this video, and we'll begin to see out of this chaos of the Reign of Terror, who is going to emerge to provide some stability for the French people, some victories militarily, but at the cost of what rights the French must give up in order to do that. So that's what we'll see in video number 3.